everyone. We'll wait a couple more minutes for people to join and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we can get going, Renzi. Thanks very much. Thank you all, and welcome to this panel discussion on Wendy Coburn's work and commitments as an artist. Andrea Fatona, co-curator of Fable for Tomorrow, and myself are thrilled to have this opportunity to talk about Fable for Tomorrow, a survey of work by Wendy Coburn. To start this in a good way, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement and acknowledge that OCAD University acknowledges the ancestral and traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Haudenosaunee, who are the original owners and custodians of the land upon which we live, work, and create, and to acknowledge that I am in Nogajiwanong, Peterborough, on the land of the Michisagig, Anishinaabe, and Chippewa Nation on the Williams Treaty lands. So I'm very pleased to have our esteemed panelists here today, Liz Magor, Ian Carr-Harris, and Barbara Fisher. I'm just going to begin with some thank yous before the event gets started. And this event is part of On-Site Gallery's Fable for Tomorrow exhibition. And we'd like to acknowledge the Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, Toronto Arts Council, Nexus, V-Tape, with additional support from anonymous donors, Jess Dobkin, Barbara Fisher, Alice Klein, Deirdre Logue, and Angela Robertson. I also really want to give my deep thanks to the on-site staff who have been fabulous and so very helpful and caring as we've put this installation of Wendy's work together. So I really want to acknowledge Francisco Alvarez, Lisa Smith, and Susan Jama. Also the audiovisual crew who are helping us here today, Renzi, Omar, and Saida. And to thank, also a great thanks to the on-site gallery student monitors who Andrea and I worked with during the installation and who continue to animate the exhibition for audience members who come into the gallery. So I want to acknowledge Zane, Haven, Ghislaine, Lewis, Angelina, Miriam, and Breyer. I'd also like to give a special thanks to Wendy Coburn's sister, Heather Peaver, and her extended family, to Paul Petra Contemporary Art for all their assistance in putting this together, the Art Museum at the University of Toronto, V-Tape, and the Art Gallery of Burlington and Oakville Galleries, as well as Linda Columbus, who helped us in the sort of early stages of this, as well as Lisa Kiss, who's the designer, and John McEwen, who has donated a part of a work to this exhibition. So it's, as you can see, there are many people who have been involved in putting on this work. It's been in this exhibition, it's been a deeply moving experience for Andrea and myself. So I'm very pleased to welcome the panelists here today. And I'll begin with bios of each of the panelists, and then we'll move to a discussion together. So Liz Magor is a Vancouver-based artist who studied at UBC, Parsons School of Design, and the Vancouver School of Art. Liz's work has been exhibited in major international exhibitions such as Documenta 8, the 41st Venice Biennale, and the 4th Biennial of Sydney. In 2019, she presented an exhibition titled Blowout at the Carpenter Center for Visual Art, Cambridge, Massachusetts, which traveled to Chicago. And she's had many solo exhibitions across Europe, US, and Canada. Liz's work is represented by Susan Hobbs Gallery in Toronto and Katrina Jeffries in Vancouver. And in 2001, she received the Governor General's Award, and in 2009, the Odin Prize and the Gershwin Iskowitz Prize in 2014. And in 2017-18, she was a guest of the DAAD Künstler in Berlin program. So welcome, Liz, and thank you for joining. I'll now introduce Ian Carr-Harris. I will say as well that Liz is a former professor at OCAD University and was a professor of Wendy's. Ian Carr-Harris, also former professor, has exhibited nationally and internationally since 1971, including at the Venice Biennale and Documenta, and solo exhibitions at the Art Gallery of Ontario and the Power Plant. He's a professor emeritus at OCAD-U, and he was a founding member of A-Space and the Power Plant in Toronto. He's represented by Susan Hobbs Gallery in Toronto, and in 2012 was named a recipient of the Governor General's Awards in Visual Arts and Media Arts. He's published reviews and articles on art since the early 1970s, and an anthology of his writings is soon to be published by Concordia University Press. So we'll look forward to that, Ian, coming shortly. And finally, I'd like to introduce Barbara Fisher, who is the Executive Director and Chief Curator at the Art Museum at the University of Toronto. And she is an associate professor in the Master of Visual Art Mid-Visual Studies program, where she has been producing and teaching in the curatorial studies stream since 2008. She graduated from University of Victoria in 1981 with a BFA in studio and has worked as a curator in the area of contemporary art at Open Space Gallery, Artist Run Centre in Victoria, Walter Phillips Gallery in Banff, the Art Gallery of Ontario, the Power Plant, and the Blackwood Gallery from 1999 to 2005. So welcome all. Just to get us started, I just wanted to speak just briefly about the exhibition and its structure, the kind of decisions that we made, Andrea and I made as curators. I also want to acknowledge that the video portion of this exhibition has been programmed by BHL and Rebecca Garrett, and we are very pleased that they're able to assist with the curatorial project in this way. And there's a separate event where Rebecca and Yael will speak to their decisions and the works themselves. So we recognize that much of the work in the exhibition may be unfamiliar to viewers. There's a lot of sculpture here that perhaps people haven't seen before, and it's the first time that we're seeing it all in one place. So it's been really exciting. It's also been deeply moving to be part of this, be part of this project in such a direct way. Wendy was connected to many communities, and those communities are, I believe, represented in the exhibition. I hope everybody sees their relationship in some way and their knowledge of Wendy's work represented in the exhibition. We made a decision to group the work according to the following themes, and we haven't delineated those themes within the exhibition because we really felt that was something that the viewers might come to on their own. And so the themes of institutional critique, nature and ecologies, alchemy and science, queer relationships and queer culture, and surveillance, particularly in relation to medicine, were the sort of the areas that we were grouping the work around. And I'm just going to pull a quotation from our essay here. And we wanted to allow Coburn's astute observations, warning calls, and expert making skills to reverberate across her various bodies of work. So I'm going to turn it over to the panelists now. First, Liz Magor will speak, and then Ian Carr-Harris, and then Barbara Fisher. And after that, we'll move into a dialogue and a conversation. So Liz, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. I agree with you that thinking about Wendy to this extent for months and months now, it is very moving, and I've traveled back in time, really. I'm only seeing the exhibition online, but it's completely stunning, and I'm so grateful to you for bringing it all together, everybody involved. To talk about Wendy, I have to start way back when she first came to OCAD, and I never was a professor anywhere, ever. I'm just an instructor, and I was a part-time instructor at OCAD before it was a university. And Wendy showed up in 1984. She had already had 2 years at Dundas Valley. So she knew what art was. She had Anne Whitlock as a teacher there. So that took her to a very advanced level, even though she was only in 3rd year when she came. And she looked just like that in the picture. And she came to class with Jasmine. Jasmine is her dog. The difference is she was wearing, I remember the first day I saw her, she was wearing a Madras plaid shirt with the dog. She was smoking cigarettes, rolling her own drum tobacco. All the students were rolling cigarettes in those days and smoking in class with their dogs. The dogs didn't smoke. I mean, students smoked. There were only about 10 people in the class, so it's easy to remember everybody. And so I noticed Wendy. The first thing she did that made me take notice was she interrupted one of my long rambles and said, "Liz, do you know where you're going with this?" And I thought, there's a person who's not afraid of any kind of hierarchy. But then the other remarkable thing was that she, one day about this time of year, I think it would be April 1984, she said that I didn't know where I was. I'd only lived in Toronto for 4 years, and I'd only stayed in the city. And she wanted to show me outside the city. So we went one Sunday on a tour to Grey County, where her people came from. And we visited her Aunt Jean, her Uncle John, a family friend named Donald, who lived alone in a modest house with a stovepipe that ran horizontally through the middle of the living room. We ended up at her parents' place for dinner. And in every household, on every property, I saw their closeness to the land. They were farmers, and their kind of innate modesty and innate kindness, which Wendy obviously absorbed from her family. And I think those qualities are evident in her work. They certainly were evident in her person as she approached the world. But I think in that very coherent society she was from, she understood what social responsibility is. And as a normal, haphazard person, I didn't know that. So I quite quickly realized that Wendy was going to teach me more than I was going to teach Wendy. And we stayed friends forever, and we are friends forever. And here she is. She lived in our place at 68 Ossington. This is her studio downstairs. She's working on something with a paste. There's some sort of gesso paste. There's Jasmine again. So that's how I'll start talking about Wendy, is about her formation in a way.
Okay, thanks, Liz. We'll go to Ian. Ian, you need to unmute.
Where'd that go?
we go.
Is that unmuted?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating, Liz. We did share some of the early years with Wendy at OCAD, as you remember. But it's fascinating to me to hear the extraordinary relationship that you developed with Wendy. I'm going to read a little text that I've written for myself, Wendy. It's probably better if I read it because my experience with Wendy was far less familiar than yours, and I think maybe what I have to say can ride as a footnote to what you just put out, Liz. And I want to say how much I appreciate hearing you talk about Wendy. In any case, this is what I thought that I might put into the mix. Our experience of someone is always partial to one degree or another, and so it was with Wendy. On one hand, I've clearly defined flashes of Wendy in the many roles that she occupied in our relationship. On the other hand, Wendy was and remains to me mysterious, both open and impenetrable. Earliest is my clear memory of her from the early 80s as a student in the Independent Studies Critiques that became a feature of OCA's Experimental Arts Department. Independent and strongly positioned would easily describe her at the time, but along with that, an attractive and even sunny ability to engage us in the somewhat quirky installations we were there to discuss. She seemed to me at the time to be one of those students who is already reaching far beyond the institution. Curiously, many years later, it was precisely Wendy's position within the same institution, now OCAD, that marked my renewed relationship with her. There were many years that passed between these two events. As chair of the program in sculpture installation, I found myself working with Wendy on administrative matters of one sort or another, most often budgetary. We would meet from time to time down the street at the Rex Tavern. Other times in her office, which was dominated by two full-size plaster black sheep that Matt Donovan had made for his thesis exhibition some years earlier. And I think Wendy probably remembers that. Wendy enjoyed being, Liz, I should say, Wendy enjoyed being surrounded by black sheep. It was fun to work with her again in such a different register. That sense of her easy and engaging honesty was unchanged. I soon re-experienced Wendy's determination and cut-to-the-chase attitude towards what mattered. The budget came face to face with reality. Finally, there is, of course, another and more profound level on which our relationship rested. Her amazingly skilled and thoughtfully founded understanding of what it is to be an artist, to make artworks. We are here to discuss that. But I would like to note that many years ago, I drove across town late in the evening to a small exhibition Wendy had in the far corner of Toronto's East End, a time when, briefly at least, the East End became a place of interest to young and aspiring galleries. Wendy was there, and as we chatted, I expressed an interest in two of her pieces, one of which is Girl and Dog. They remain among the most treasured artworks in our collection. One could read much into this work of art, but for me, they remain a testament to both Wendy's defiance towards society's failures, and beyond that, to her alluring grasp of the beauty we must continue to see in the world around us if those failures are to be addressed. And I think I often reflect, both Yvonne and I often reflect on what an incredible loss it is to be here today talking about Wendy in absentia. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian. Barbara?
Yeah, hello. Thanks so much, Liz and Ian. How moving such words were of yours. And I could not wholeheartedly concur more with your perceptions of Wendy as a person and as an artist and of her commitments. I was thinking, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel. It's such an important moment from two perspectives. For me, as a curator, I would say, because this is the first exhibition of seeing Wendy's work as a body of work, which never happened in her lifetime. And that itself makes this occasion really particularly critical. At the same time that it comes after her passing away, and is therefore any remark about her work now is kind of under the shadow of her passing away too soon, too early, and also under such difficult circumstances. So there's this mixture. So in other words, my thinking through Wendy is, as a curator, how I encountered her work first. So it's a little bit of reminiscence and a little bit of commentary. And then I want to go a little bit more in detail about the exhibition that took place and that we put together at the Justina Barnicke Gallery at the end of 2014. I met Wendy through Liz, actually, and I think it was a studio visit. And Liz, I don't know if I remember this in fact correctly, but the piece Subscribe, which consisted of all of the magazines that were cut out in such a precise way with the silhouettes of everyday folk. And I don't know, Renzi, if you may be able to go to Subscribe to just show it on screen. Did she show that for the first time in the studio downstairs?
She did it. She did it there, and I have to add that she did it by hand because there was no laser cutting really happening then.
It's an incredible work. Kim, my partner, and I went to see it in the studio downstairs. Then I'm glad I remembered this correctly. It was just stunning, kind of really a tour de force. This assembly of magazines pulled from every which way, from GQ to porn magazines, The Hustler to Maclean's, to art magazines, etc. So in other words, there's a sort of a panoply of ideological imagery that seeks us to subscribe to them, that she cuts out in this really just precisioned way with figures from everyday life. So the work is a kind of encounter of dissonance, of a dissembling, of a kind of collision of the ordinary and everyday with ideology that seeks us to subscribe to it and to purchase it and to buy into it, if you will. So it was really an amazing work. It stuck with us, and it kind of forever made me curious about her work. And I think many of us really remember this particular, which was a open studio kind of exhibition. And but then I lost track. And what Ian, you said, that Wendy had this side of being very covert and quiet and mysterious. So she would kind of disappear or be off the radar in some ways, in the art scene, if you will, if one can call it that. She would attend things and so on. But somehow, that it is sort of in retrospect, a kind of a great loss that we didn't experience her work during her lifetime, and that she wasn't given her due for perhaps complex reasons. And the next time I saw her work was in the Oakville Galleries exhibition that was curated by Reed Diamond, who's also an OCAD grad and alumni, if you will, and Marnie Fleming, and it was called Beaver Tales. And the work, this was almost 10, wait a minute, no, not 10 years. Yeah, almost 10 years later. So this is a huge interval not to have, followed really or seen her work in any way in Toronto. And the work was stunning. And if Renzi, you could maybe go to it. It just took everyone who saw the show by this delight of shock, of her detourning Joyce Wieland's remarkable beaver suckling the spirit of Canada suckling the French and English beaver, which in itself was a detournement of the Romus and Remulus statue being suckled by the she-wolf, just her interpretation of it in lesbian terms, in queering this image from history and bringing it back in such an unexpected and fabulous way. And so and this was also the moment when Wendy at some point writes about her interest in taking up the motif of animals with a sort of deeply self-critical way, but driven by, there's an essay of hers which is called In Botching It in Science and Art, Lab-Built Mothers and the Wonders of Animal Instincts. I haven't yet found the source of where this essay was actually, because she sent it to me when we were working on her show. And she makes reference to the 1999 Bruce Begmill book called Biological Exuberance, Animal Homosexuality and Natural Diversity, which was kind of a real, I think, a huge flashpoint, because it debunked the notion that heterosexuality was the norm, even in the animal kingdom, and humans were aberrant by queering acts, so to speak, and homosexuality in quotations. And Wendy writes about how important this book was and how important its reception was to debunk heteronormativity. I don't know, I think I may be running too long in all of this, but
that's fine.
I would love at times to quote some of it from her, but maybe I'll just reserve that for later, for the writing. So I think her work really took a big cue from this essay, because a lot of studies of her work between nature, animals, and human, and to avow the kind of limitations of thinking of the human and animal as separate, sexuality as singular, and going against the norms of so much, which ended going against ideology, really, ultimately. But also, and I think that I found that very particularly moving in the exhibition, that it really is about love. Like her work, there's so much in her work. Ultimately, the anchor point of so much of her work turns around love. And this is not in a sentimental way, but in a really rigorous way as to what happens to queer love, to those who love in ways that is not authorized in our culture, including, of course, then encounters with police. And this takes us all the way to her important final film. I would just like to also, she was, as Wendy always was, in my experience of her, really, especially when working with her on the exhibition, on her final exhibition, she was self-critical to a fault. I think maybe sometimes that she was so precise always. When we did the press release alone, I think we spent something like 20 days. She spent polishing it and finishing it and being concerned about just being accurate or to the point and to be exact. So she was very much a wordsmith. She knew a lot about language and about image making to an extent that was just really outstanding. She was very self-critical about the question of anthropomorphism and the assumption of animal-human relations. And that comes across really in the piece Die Trauernde, which means the one in mourning. This kind of harrowing piece of a botched science experiment, but one ironically concerned, of course, with the question of love, the study of how children might fare when they are suffering the loss of the mother and or of loss and of love and affection. And it's one of the most moving and terrifying works, ultimately. Wendy calls it a theater of betrayal and an anthem to the unloved. And those two, so this piece was done in, I think, remind me, 2003. And I feel it foreshadows what happened with Anatomy of a Protest. I think you could use this description, a theater of betrayal and an anthem to the unloved, for what is going on in the film. The film is amazing for everyone who has seen it. It's for me, as I also said at the opening, because you worked on it right up to the opening. It was never really finished. She kept working and polishing it and precision cutting it and so on. And it was just such a revelation. I think one of the sort of a monumental achievement of looking locally, paying attention to signs, the way only an artist, in my opinion, can perhaps do, for the way in which in this protest march, signs unravel and the situation unfurls and begins to be infused with a kind of poison by a group of performance artists, as they call themselves, but were really in fact provocateurs whose message was clearly aligned with that of the police and police attitude toward queer women and street workers and sex workers and so on. It really is a kind of anthem to the loved by the unloved, and a theater of betrayal. I think it might be interesting for some, if you were not kind of around at that moment, to know that we presented it in the context of a program of photographs by Allen Ginsberg, an exhibition on surveillance, a programming cycle called The Politics and Poetics of Visibility, in which we also showed a film that just had appeared called The Line Has Shattered by Robert McTavish, who looked at the Vancouver Poetry Conference and the Beat Generation, and talks about agent provocateurs who disrupt and with rather primitive means try to infiltrate the poetry conference. So a kind of continuum. As the exhibition was mounted, opened on October 30th, on November 11th, I get an email from our gallery attendant, Amy Lou. Hi, Barbara and Rebecca. I think I should bring to your attention an interaction I had with the visitors this Sunday when I was sitting the gallery. A short blonde lady, probably in her 20s, came in with two other people and asked about the video. They were in there probably for the whole length of the video. When she came out, she told me that she was in the video and that she was falsely framed as one of the supporting characters. This unleashed a series of events, including Wendy retracting her observation of this particular woman, who is a writer, who also writes for the Toronto Star, actually today teaches at U of T, and issued an apology that appeared in the exhibition. Murray White came into the exhibition in that week and then wrote a review without noting, however, the retraction that Wendy had already made to him. A review was published, which was very leading in tone, insinuating that Wendy's stance was, in fact, to call these provocateurs as agents of the police in stronger terms than Wendy was ever willing to do. Wendy was very careful to suggest that she's inquiring into the signs that unfurl in front of her. And so this then leads to one of the characters coming to the art gallery, to the Justina Barnicka gallery, Daryl Diamond Kay, who was someone Wendy identifies and sees part of the protest march changing clothing several times. And he serves us, as a result of the article by Murray White and the retraction even of the Toronto Star the following day, he serves a lawsuit in which the University of Toronto is named, as well as Wendy and the Toronto Star. It's a very facetious libel suit. There was no basis to it. The university responded with a defense. The defense was unequivocally correct, even from a lay person's perspective, in that there was nothing libelous in Wendy's position. But I think this lawsuit, it ultimately, the writ was served in March of 2015. The defense on part of the university, and I don't know what the Toronto Star did, but the defense, nothing was followed. We never got a response back from Diamond Daryl. But in the days after these events, Wendy and I were in touch, and Wendy felt, and this is where, I think for me, looking back and trying to understand and cope with what happened, I think, as a white person, I'm not queer, I don't think I understood the profundity of sense of fragility and frailty and vulnerability that Wendy was experiencing. She, I think, catapulted into a deep depression, and she felt she had failed with this work, which is unequivocally, absolutely not, inconceivable to me, because it is such an important work. And but she also felt, and she described having that there was a police car parked on her street in the vicinity of her house. She felt that there was a police presence that regularly surrounded her in the days afterwards. And I think this is what catapulted her into a crisis from which she could not return. And I think it exposes in many ways the kind of vulnerability that still is exercised against those who do not fit the schemas of what the police is set to protect. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry for taking so much longer.
Could I,
Barbara, go ahead, Liz.
Could I respond? Barbara, there's so many things there to respond to. But in a way, since both you and Ian alluded to the fact that Wendy was a disappearing act or wasn't there, she was there. I think one thing we should remember is that from about 1990 to about 2000, she didn't live in Toronto. She went to Montreal to do her MFA. And she had discovered, I think you know about that trove of newspaper clippings about lynching in the southern United States. She had found that. I actually used to know where she found it, but now I can't remember. It was a massive, an extensive collection of clippings of one lynching and all the trial and business around it. And it indicated that whoever collected these clippings was in some way involved. So Wendy came across this in the 80s when she was working on the magazines. And she was very, very, very unhappy with the contents. And I think it was the first moment that she recognized that this solid, honest, good background that she came from was limited and was circumscribed and perhaps protected through privilege. And she became more complex at that point. And she was angry, and she also didn't know how to channel her resources, her intellectual resources, her emotional resources as an artist. So she took 10 years to work that out, and she did a good job, as we can see. So the decade of the 90s, she was going to Concordia. A very close colleague, fellow student there was Jin-Mi Yoon, who had already investigated, the problem of whiteness, being a non-white person herself. She also had there as a teacher, Corinne Corey, who was instrumental in starting new programs focusing on gender. It's too bad Wendy and Corinne didn't get along, but I think that they learned things from each other. She then moved to Vancouver to try to get away from the confines of not just Toronto, but the world she knew. And I think she was there for a couple of years. Then she came back. So you can see there's 10 years where there's not much work produced. Mm-hmm. She also had money problems. It took getting those first gigs at OCAD, and I think she worked with you, Barbara, to start bringing in enough money. And you can see how the work took off after 2007 when she gave up all those heavy duties as, what was she, assistant dean, or she was some form of dean that would just eat up time, and developing teaching programs. So those 10 years, she was very, very present as being an artist. She was determining what she would work on. I think Anatomy of a Protest is the last work that we know that she completed or didn't complete. But I think from what I see of the exhibition online, there's that period from 2007, 2002 with the beaver works. And I think the little dog Ian is 2002, somewhere in there. That was a pretty interesting bunch of sculpture there that to me was the result of Wendy taking her formative education as a child and a young artist, honing it and toughening it up as an artist in her 30s, and then laying it on in a complex way. The anger that she rightly had, and that we all should have, was tweaked through this sense of humor and this kind of surreal fables that she could manufacture in her imagination. So it wasn't just protest stuff. She was always implicated. I think she felt always that she was implicated in the injustices of the world. It wasn't a blaming program that she was working on. It's too bad there isn't more work. I agree with you that it's too bad there isn't more work. And I think had she been noticed earlier, there would have been more work, because all artists need support, not just financial support, but they need kind of encouragement from, curators and gallerists. And she didn't have that, even though she tried, and I tried. What, Barbara, what's the hand?
I would just say, I didn't mean to imply that she didn't do a lot of work. I only focused on a few that were sort of high points where all of a sudden there was a body of work that was emerging that was quite, so anyways, just to correct that perception.
No, I certainly wasn't, saying that. I'm lamenting that in the 20 years from 1990, that's what, 15 years, 1990 to there's 25 years. I'm lamenting there wasn't more work, given the way, the complex person she was, and the way she determined that she would make art. I'm lamenting there wasn't more work. And I'm kind of trying to fill in details of the 90s. That's all.
Yeah, no, that's really great too. Thank you for illuminating that part, that 10 years in particular, and what she was encountering.
I envy, Ian, you having girl and dog. I saw all of these sculptures at Wendy's house because I was at her house whenever I was in Toronto. Mm-hmm. And then I was in her studio in the backyard where she made the end and the acorn and things like that. And I remember her showing me the girl and dog, and we laughed and we laughed and we laughed and we laughed. I still laugh when I see it. It's so, she had that little terrier named Girlfriend, who is exactly like that little dog. There was so much of the way she would, one thread of everything is her understanding of herself. Mm-hmm. And she recognizes that she is a thread in a big piece of fabric, of which many of those threads are not very nice. And she somehow would get all the notes into these works. I'm very, very glad I have the beaver one. I don't know what it's called, but it's the one just to the left in this photograph, the bronze one, that one. I have it on my mantelpiece in Vancouver, and I have every manner of visitor to my house, and I always use it as a gauge. It's like taking someone's temperature, because they're snooping around, and then they look at this, then they look at me. So it's very small. I mean, it's, what is it, 10 inches maybe from head to toe, but the punch that it packs is enormous, which is another thing about Wendy, is these very succinct, you know, Barbara, it consistent with your idea of her precision and her carefulness, is that sure, she didn't make a ton of work, but each one has, you know, 5, these are not one-liners, these are not whimsical, these are not quips, these are heavy, deep little things that are just loaded. So I wish I had 2 or 3. I've only got 1, but I'm glad to see they're going to your collection. That's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, of course, I'm very proud of that piece, to have it. It's amazing to have it as a signal of Wendy's interests and mine as well. One of the things I love about the piece, I'm not going to go on too long about it, but one of the things I love about the piece is that, in fact, it's 2 objects, the dog and the girl, and they are separable. In other words, you can play with their relationship.
Oh.
So one of the wonderful things I love about this, that it's not a set piece, but it's one that you can play with, and the dog can take different positions with respect to the girl and vice versa. And I think it's that flexibility in the piece that struck me when I saw it, and the reason I wanted it so badly. And it was wonderful that Wendy was able to give me a copy. I'd just like to say that, yeah, it is a pity that there isn't more work, that Wendy didn't have a chance to make more work. But when I was in the exhibition the other day and moving through it, I was actually struck by how many works there were or are, and how well they, as a coherent grouping of works, how they managed to take us through the many facets of Wendy's imagination and her determinations, I guess is perhaps an even better word. I wonder how many works an artist actually has to show to the world ultimately in order to do that. I've always been struck by the thought that you know, many artists overproduce. And going through the exhibition, I was struck by a feeling that, particularly when I ended up with the video, a feeling that somehow, obviously without any particular intention in mind, that these works constitute a wonderful anthology, you might say even, of an artist of Wendy's capabilities and determinations. I wonder, I'm also curious, of course, I understand what you were saying, Barbara, about the spiraling into depression that followed upon the controversies surrounding the film. And I'm well aware that that's very real, and that any artist could perhaps be overtaken by that. I wonder if Wendy, and this is purely speculation, but I wonder if Wendy, in some ways, saw that film as almost a summation of the problems that she had encountered as a living artist. It is a beautiful film. I said a few minutes earlier that if we give up on beauty, then we give up on the determinations that will lead us to change the world. And it seems to me that that film encapsulates that as much as, for instance, Girl and Dog. I guess I'm getting into speculation here, but I can't help but think that if Wendy were to see this exhibition, she would possibly be very happy with how this grouping of works actually becomes a portrait of what she wanted to do as an artist. I don't know if anybody would want to comment on that, but
Thanks, Ian. Liz, go ahead. I just wanted to fill in some blanks if
Okay.
you're interested, but do you want to go ahead?
No, blanks are good to fill in.
Okay. So in the mid 90s, Wendy was working with that material that you were talking about, Liz, the transcripts of the court proceedings from the lynching, and produced a video installation called "Supposing It Was Your Sister." And I don't know if anybody here has seen that. There were 5 monitors on 5 plinths, I think, and there was a space for the viewer in the center on a rotating stage, and the images were of so it was unmediated readings of the transcript by people who were witnesses at the trial and people who were involved with the trial. All of them were white. So there's a kind of spinning and twisting that happens in the work because the viewer is spinning, and the subjects in the videos are also turning. And then in the background, there are images that Wendy has chosen, some of which are from the transcript, some of which are of lynching-related imagery and diagrams, and so it's quite a compelling work. When we were putting this exhibition together, particularly around the video, Yael and Rebecca and Andrea and I made the decision to cut that work into a single channel work, as opposed to recreating the installation itself, because that was very difficult to recreate for a number of reasons. So this final work, Supposing It Was Your Sister, has 4 screens in it. And so the images from the video monitors are present in those on those 4 screens, and so you see 4 heads at once as different as the audio is cut in and out, and it's a consistent audio. It becomes a narrative and quite chronological in relation to the exhibition and to the original exhibition. However, we recognize that, and this goes to what each of you are speaking about, Wendy's, social responsibility, but also implications of herself in her work and the way that she, I think, grappled with that as a white woman, and the way she really did, I think, address it head on in her work, and especially in this work, Supposing It Was Your Sister. But our concern was that to show it without some kind of framework, so that someone would come across it in the exhibition, and some of the imagery that exists in it, we decided was too difficult and too triggering for people who are not white. So the way it centers whiteness is the intent of the work, but the way that the implications of that were, for us, quite problematic and quite concerning. So we decided not to show the work in the exhibition. So I wanted to just put that in to fill in that space between, also because it wasn't the original work, right? I think it might have been quite different if we had shown it in its original instantiation as an installation. So that work exists. It's in a sense a new work, a new iteration of that installation. And it also, Andrea and I have talked about how it might be presented, other opportunities for presentation of that work outside of this exhibition. So I just wanted to make you aware that that exists, that we went through that process, and that we made a decision to pull the work from the exhibition.
I see a note in the chat space from Martha Fleming, who said that this was part of her graduating exhibition at MFA at Concordia, supposing it was your sister. I don't know if it was an early version of it, or this is just, at some point it would be nice to have some kind of document that does give a chronology. That will be in what you publish, won't it, Caroline?
Yes, yes.
Chronology of of her education and what she produced and what was happening when she produced these things. Because I've really been rummaging around. I couldn't even remember the year she was at school. I had to kind of go way back into notebooks and boxes of photographs to put, this is like from 1984 till now. What is that, 30 or 40 years? It's a long time. And okay, so I've just asked Martha what else was in that exhibition. Maybe she'll tell us. As to what I was going to say before, I totally forget, so it doesn't matter.
Oh, I'm sorry. We can open it up as well to questions from the participants as opposed to the audience in this event. Go ahead, Barbara.
Just a quick note about the film and what happened to Wendy. I do feel that she was threatened. Yeah, I don't think. In other words, it's not just someone being depressed or her spiraling into depression. A lawsuit of that kind, personalized, addressed to Wendy on part of one of these provocateurs, that's threatening and deeply, deeply troubling. And it was. So I just want to take it out of the personalizing of it and really talk about, this is exactly the kind of vulnerability that she was also dealing with in terms of subject, right? That she countered in the film. So anyways, I just wanted to, say that.
I remember now what I was going to say. It was that Wendy, as I said, she became my instructor before 1990, and I was not a very good student. And I remember, I'm laughing, but not funny, that when the massacre of the women at Polytechnique took place, I saw Wendy and she was angry and she said, "This is misogyny." And I said, "No, he's just a nut." Do you remember that? I said, "No, he's just a nut." And of course I was wrong to try to blow it off that way and just say it's one individual. And it took me another 2 years, let's say, to catch up to Wendy. I also remember her showing me a proposal for the Toronto Sculpture Garden or Sculpture Park, whatever it's called, that just had the word dyke in giant letters, and she wanted to just plant it in the park. I'm not sure whether she ever submitted it and it was rejected or whether it was an idea. And I also remember looking at that and thinking, I didn't get it. And it took me another 2 years to get it. And so along those lines, I honestly think that if Wendy was alive to see these, what I hope are permanent transformations in how we regard not just women, but all alternatives to white heterosexuality, and just the enormous changes that have happened since, I guess I would call it since the Me Too movement, I think she would be gratified. I think she was pushing and pushing and pushing against an intransigent blockage in our way of seeing things in our society. And some of those things now have given way, and there's a sort of I think there's a change underway, which she won't be able to see. And I think it would be encouraging for her. She was frustrated with us. I mean, very frustrated with our lack of sight, really.
Yeah, she was enormously present. It's amazing to look at that exhibition, and it feels so contemporary and still future facing in ways that you wouldn't imagine that the work wasn't made just yesterday. It's just incredible. Michelle White has a question. So, Michelle, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you very much, Carolyn. I want to go back to Wendy as a student back in the days when Liz McGore and Colette Whiten and I were all teaching together and establishing equity at OCA. And Wendy came into my, I'm in my 40th year teaching. So I recollect those years very fondly. It was before we became a university. What I want to remind us all of is that in the years that Wendy spent at OCAD as an administrator, she established the Art and Social Change Program. And that one of her big commitments, which I think this panel is addressing, is her commitment to generations of people to come. For one thing, I'll never forget that she left every day from the office saying, "Thank you all for your good work today." And that alludes to what Liz observed in Wendy's upbringing, that she wanted to bring a family loving feeling to the environment that she shared, whether it was in the studio or the classroom or the office. And that buoyancy that she brought to us all, at the same time we understood that she was digging deep into what she was committed to in establishing curriculum at OCAD that would change the whole university. And just like equity did, Wendy did. And I'll just leave it there. Those weren't wasted years by any means. They were so fruitful.
True, yeah.
They were so fruitful.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Just noticing in the chat a lengthy comment by Lynn Fernie, and thanks everyone for participating in this way. I just wondered, Lynn, if you wanted to say anything about that, or maybe not. Just around the that public sculpture dike, yes, she did. She did submit that to the sculpture garden, I believe, and it was rejected. I don't know. We had a thought at some point. I don't even know when it was that we would somehow manage to get that public sculpture made. You know, that we would move to, because even having that word dike, I think, is really significant, and in terms of time and chronology in queer movements. Also, go ahead, Liz.
Well, it's not that I'm so backward that when I said I didn't get it, that I was so backward. It's just that she was so advanced, let's say. It's just a timing thing. And I also wanted to talk about the fact that the work she made that was figurative, that was small and not bombastic, that was very narrative, these were proscribed things, that kind of the theoretical premises that came out of minimalism would say narrative, forget about it. And artists who were interested in narrative felt vaguely ashamed that they would have to hide that impulse. And the figurative is still scary to many people who were raised under a certain regime of art. And Wendy, so these works look very contemporary and very easy to absorb now in the form that they are. But when she was making them, it wasn't so acceptable. So she I mean, in reaching back to what a fable is and reaching back to what a dreamlike image is, she is reaching back into the deep past of how art is made, but often the deep ways that art is made is rejected by the contemporary isms that want a certain kind of look. And so I'm partly defending myself. Like, I mean, how did I not get the Dyke thing? I just didn't quite, there was something I didn't quite get about it, but yeah, let's do that. Let's do a GoFundMe or something.
That's true.
I wonder how complete the proposal is. I mean, I wonder if it has the dimensions and the material and the color and all of it.
Well,
And
Johanna has put in the chat that the material is like a dike.
Right.
So
right.
steel cage
remember,
rocks used in the construction of dikes.
Right.
Of course, I had no idea actually.
Yeah.
Barbara?
I must admit, because I just, Liz, I share the kind of perplexity that came with looking at Wendy's work and not having a background. Sometimes I had the thing with the U-Haul series. I didn't know the joke about U-Haulism in lesbian culture, and it's of course fabulously funny and exuberant. That series, right, celebrating the capacity to create belonging in this sort of subcultural way. And anyways.
And I just noticed, I've been thinking about what looks like an anomalies, the photographs of the running shoes, you know, that are kind of product photographs, and the U-Haul is kind of product photographs. And they seem at odds with these more folky sculptures that are not folky, but just more studio kind of artisanal artist renderings. But now I realize that they're very similar to the cutout works in the magazines. You know, that the magazines are always pushing the ideal, and our real lives never meet the ideal, and our real lives are are subsumed or buried by these, you know, these fantasies of escape, or these fantasies of how we will look or what our belongings will be like. And so there is a consistency. I always forget what those cutout works are called. What are they called? Subscribe, right. There's a connection there of her noticing that we are robbed really by media representations. They rob us of our own ability to imagine who we are, and that she's pushing through it all the time. This is literally her pushing an image of real people, because the cutouts are of ordinary people. The magazine covers are of extraordinary, unreal people. And so that contrast is always there. And as we're talking, I understand these product photographs a bit better. You know, seeing her work in bits and pieces over all those years, I wasn't really pulling them together to see the train of thought. I knew her train of thought from discussion, because we talked about her work, everybody's work, and we also talked about what to do about our place in our societies and so on, and how to, you know, how to conduct ourselves and what to expect of others. So none of these ideas are a surprise. It's just that here they are, kind of manifest in concrete form in these artworks. And these are kind of like, I don't know, extrusions out of, you know, out of thinking. They're kind of extruded out of her thinking in these little blips.
Barbara, go ahead.
A note to the running shoes and those, Wendy was really interested in that exhibition, Disobedient Objects, that happened at the Victoria and Albert Museum, which was a study of the kind of props used by protesters. And of course, this series is a kind of subversion of that, because it's not the props by protesters, but by provocateurs and agents. And running shoes have a particular history. The new shiny running shoe is a marker for undercovers to recognize each other in protest. So that becomes, they distinguish themselves so that it's a code, so that you know who is with and with not with with protesters. Another artist, Brazilian artist, did an amazing study on this. Actually, I don't have his name, but just to give that a little bit of context.
Okay, thank you. Lynn, would you like to speak? We can enable your mic, as we can with anyone who has a question.
Hi, this is a fabulous panel. I think Wendy would be absolutely astonished and delighted. When Wendy and I did a little show together, I think Ian Carr-Harris referenced it at Elizabeth Farron's gallery in the East End called The Instincts of Animal Wonders, or The Wonders of Animal Instincts. She did write a text, and in some ways, she was a shapeshifter in that sense of her text, of seeing herself. At one point, she says in her text that she thought at one time people on TV could see her. So her relationship between kind of shape-shifting her point of view and who she was and her dyke or lesbian identity is very profoundly important. In a way, I think some of her work takes a kind of queer camp or gay camp, lesbian camp, but she queers history through it and the history of art as well, because there's that sense of humor you find in Laurie Milland's work that kind of turns things on the edge, very different aesthetics, but turns things on the edge. So I just wanted to say, I do have text and images from that show if it's missing from your research, and I'd be very happy to dig them out for you if you just want to get in touch with me if you don't have them. But thank you very much. It's fabulous to hear such excellent consideration of her work. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Yes, I think we'd all be interested in that, and Andrea and I in particular, as we write for the catalog. And as Liz said, create a proper chronology, not quite a catalog raisonné, but certainly a good chronology of her practice and where she was when and what she was making when. And something that Lillian Allen told me a story. She said that Wendy left Wendy distributed a lot of her plants, towards the end of her life, in fact. And I have quite a huge patch of mammoth grass or zebra grass in my backyard that comes up every year. And she left a bronze cabbage in Lillian Allen's garden. And Lillian sent me a picture of it, and I didn't know it existed. And I thought, typical, just and I wouldn't call it sneaky. I think I would definitely call it cheeky, but that, the mystery that Ian was talking about, the way, her work is distributed among her friends and her colleagues. Some of our concerns, and one of the, I think, reasons behind this exhibition, other than just to see the work in one place and to honor this profound artist's legacy, is to ensure that the work is distributed, and that it's more open. It's open to the public in a way that it hasn't been to date. So, we really appreciate Paul Petro's incredible assistance with this. He's been amazing and deeply invested, in fact, in the work itself. And I think feels much the same way as everyone who's spoken does about the work. So we've been very, very fortunate. And I think Wendy's family is very fortunate to have his assistance with this. We could close out now if there aren't any other questions. There's just one question about supposing it was your sister and its viewing. I think Andrea and I will be with Yael and Rebecca's assistance thinking about how that might occur and where that might occur. But I think the intent is to definitely distribute the work. It's just, we felt that it needed framing differently than within the context of a large public exhibition. Anyone have any final closing remarks or?
Carolyn, is there a time frame for this catalog?
You know, we're trying to start, you know, we have funding for it, and we are planning on getting it up and rolling soon. It won't be, you know, in line with the closing. We're hoping to have a closing reception for the exhibition. Fingers crossed, you know, but we're expecting that maybe by the fall we would have it, and we'll do a launch.
Great.
Barbara's writing for the catalog. We're very pleased about that.
It would be an opportunity to celebrate her once more.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So just in closing, thank you so much, Liz and Ian and Barbara, for your remarks. It's been really moving. It's been hard not to be weeping in this discussion as well. I think it's, and, you know, I believe Wendy would be thrilled to see the exhibition, to see all the work in one place, and to know, you know, like I think she was enormously productive in the time that she was living and was with us. As you say, Ian, how many works make a body of work, a life's body of work? There seems to be a lot there.
Mm-hmm.
And although they're small, they're weighty, and it's been very exciting for us, for Angie and I and Yael and Rebecca and Lisa and the gallery staff to put this exhibition together and have it so beautifully executed. I just can't thank people enough. I just want to draw people's attention to Jess Dobkin's performance work that she has so kindly and generously included in this exhibition. And it's, what is the name of that piece of Jess's? I keep thinking. Pardon?
It's called Holding Coburn.
Oh, right, Holding Coburn. And so I would encourage anybody who can get into the exhibition to be there on a Saturday when you can participate in holding Wendy's molds in a rocking chair and in the nursery. So it's very clever, and also I think very moving to experience that work as well. So thanks so much to Jess. And there will be a video curators chat with Rebecca and Yael on Friday the 1st at 3 p.m. So there are details on the on-site website. And thanks everyone for joining today in this afternoon conversation. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to the staff at on-site and everyone who supported this technologically. Bye for now.
Lovely.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
You're not saying goodbye?
I will. Mhm.